that would be a good name for you. And I thought, well, that's a sign, right? I better take on this identity.
It's meant to be.
It's
yeah.
meant to be.
Yeah.
So I go whipping back to Toronto to a friend who's a fashion designer and who would design wrestling gear for me when I lived there. And I said, Matthew, this is my new gimmick. Can you make me a really kick-ass singlet that, you know, for Sergeant Dixon?
Right.
And he says, oh, I can do it. And he did a formal fitting on me. He actually had my pattern already. He had a singlet pattern already made for me right to my body size. And so he just used that pattern. He made this military green with gold trim singlet. It was just phenomenal. And I began. And I remember getting that singlet, and the next thing you know, I'm already wrestling Big Daddy V. You know,
Oh,
like
wow,
it's crazy. Yeah. So it actually went really quick. And I discovered that I believe I'm not just there at the wrestling show for me. I love wrestling, but you always need to take into consideration the audience. That's why you're really there. And there's so many wrestlers that just wrestle and don't, through their match, they could be taken, well, they're kicking ass and the guy's over there doing whatever he's doing. They could actually turn and interact with the audience way more. And let the audience bring them in, just like you do in Shakespearean theater. Yeah. When a guy does an aside and he goes off to the stage and the lights go down and there's just one spotlight on that actor. And he or she is doing their part and talking right at the audience and sucking them in. And I discovered that's my strength. Wrestling's fine, I got all the basics down. I don't have to be, you know, the best wrestler in the universe, although it helps being proficient.
Right.
But I learned that having good stage presence and being able to interact with the audience often throughout the match, always pulling them in, always inviting them into what's going on, worked for me. So over time, I started telling people, you know, in essence, I wrestle with my mouth. And the things I say.
That's the way for longevity and to get the crowd back.
That's right.
We're not doing a practice match.
Yeah, that's right.
There for a reason. Like,
that's right. Exactly it.
I was very guilty of this in my early career. Now I'm finally too little too late, but I'm finally realizing just play to the audience. That's what they're there for.
That's right. They're there to see you and to be entertained by you.
And what other live show can the audience engage? Like, you don't see, like, you go to a hockey game, you don't see the hockey players jawing back to the fan.
No.
Whereas in wrestling, you can.
Yeah,
You can
there's
make
that,
them a part of the
yes,
show.
they are the show.
Precisely.
Right? Because as the business says, your business is successful if there are asses in the seats. And the only way that there are asses going to be in the seats if they feel welcomed and valued. Even if you're the heel hating on them. Hate on them well.
Yeah, because then
right?
they might have had a bad week at work, and then they can let their frustrations out on you. Like,
absolutely, for sure. So that went really well, and I enjoyed working for them. And I really love, though, doing shows in Tillsonburg at the community center or at the fairground, because I found that I could build a rapport with that audience, because they would come back. And then they started doing fair shows a lot, like touring from fairs. And fairs are fine, but it's not the same because it's a one-off. There's no program taking place. It's not like those people who are going to watch wrestling at the fair show were at the last wrestling show and witnessing a storyline unfold. There is no storyline.
And some of them are not even there to watch the wrestling.
Right, they're kind of watching out of curiosity.
Yeah. Right,
and I also liked Tillsonburg because it was close to home. And because I'm a teacher, I have a career, I make art, like I'm not just a wrestler, I make art, I have lots on the go.
Yeah, time is precious.
Time is precious. So I eventually started, I did that for some time, and then one day I was in Guelph with my partner at the time. His name was Tom, and not Guelph, sorry. I was in Goderich.
Oh, nice.
All right, and we were just there visiting, and that wasn't long after when the tornado came through and wiped out half that town.
Right.
And just out of coincidence, we're sitting in a restaurant, and we look over, and there's a poster for a PWA show. And it was a fundraiser to help raise money to, reconstruct the town, which I thought was great. And they did it at an auto dealership. So the change room for these wrestlers that were working the show was the auto shop or whatever. And the parking lot of this car dealership became the wrestling arena. And so he and we were at the restaurant, we said, why don't we go check it out? And I sat there, and some of the workers there have recognized me through Facebook, even though I didn't work for PWA.
Yeah, just fellow wrestlers always kind of like link up. Right?
Yeah, link up, right? And they said, oh, there's Sarge, right? And by that time, people were no longer calling me Sergeant Dixon. I guess that's too long. Everybody just called me Sarge. Like even Cody Diener would say Sarge. And eventually that name just took. Because no one would say the long form of my name. They just call me Sarge. So I just eventually just took that on as my identity.
Right.
And I enjoyed it. It was really fun, and it was quite old school in the style of wrestling, and I loved it. So when I got back home, I sent Eddie a message and said, someday I'd like to come and work for you if that's okay. And he eventually put me on a show. I said, well, the closest venue, I guess, would be Kitchener, and he put me on the show. And eventually, and I think he discovered the audience loves to hate me.
Yeah.
And I was
really hard nowadays, I find, because a lot of the audience knows a lot.
They know everything because there's no secrets.
So it's like if you're doing a good job of making them hate you, sometimes they'll cheer for you because they respect that, or some people just want to be the guy that cheers for the bad guy to be different.
Yeah, well, because
so sometimes
people do want the bad guy to win,
yeah,
because they're sick of the dynamic that good always wins in wrestling, which is how it's supposed to be, right? In the end, the heel always loses. They might win in the program some matches, but in the end of that storyline, they lose.
Yeah, win the battle, lose the war.
Lose the war,
yeah.
right? So
it was going good for you, right?
So yeah, and then really, I had so much fun, and I loved wrestling there, and I loved the style of wrestling that most of the guys there worked. And the reason is because that locker room is older. There's all kinds of 40-somethings in that locker room.
Oh yeah.
I'm not the only one, right? So, and they come from a time where wrestling was different, and they still abide by those traditions, and I like that.
Yeah.
And I found it the place for me. And I also found that it was a really fun place to work.
The crowd is amazing.
And the crowd
I love the
is
crowd.
amazing. So, I enjoyed it, and I was doing so well until I crippled myself.
Oh yes, yes.
Right? But what I love about PWA is even though for almost a year and a half to 2 years I was in rehab, they gave me, part of my physiotherapy when I was off of work was I had to start learning to drive in a car again. Like I couldn't even sit in a car and drive for 15 minutes because my leg would be in so much pain just sitting on it. It was torturous.
Oh, for sure.
So I had to start off by taking little drives, 10 minutes, 20 minutes, a half hour, until I could get used to it. And once I was able to drive for about an hour, I would go out to Kitchener. Now obviously I wasn't wrestling, but they would use me as a manager type character with Lenny.
Yeah, I remember that.
Yes, or a valet of some sort, or as a worker in the audience that energized the crowd throughout the show. So I always had a part to play, even when I wasn't wrestling. And I think that's a really important lesson that a lot of people don't think about. Pro wrestling just isn't about the pro wrestlers. It's about the person who does the sound, who does the setup, the people who set up the ring, and everybody who makes the show a whole production. They all matter and they all have value. The ref, you know what I'm talking
of
about.
course.
The managers, valets,
I
etc.
can't disagree with anything you said the whole interview.
Okay, so they, I love them for that they still made use of me, and I was still there wrestling with my mouth.
And it's hard because some people go into depression. I know when I broke my ankle,
I was very depressed.
That was my one thing to keep me happy, and I couldn't do it. So
it was
it's nice to throw you a bone.
Right, and it made me realize that I still, because I'll tell you, my injury was so severe, I wasn't sure that I would be walking without a cane for my life, right?
Oh my.
So it was very serious. But fortunately, with a lot of will and finding the right physiotherapist, I made it through to the other side. And I was grateful for them for having me there, even when I couldn't be, because that depression or that sadness that I felt I used to be so built and muscular and strong, even for a guy I'm 5'6.5", okay, that's the truth.
But your physique is incredible.
It's pretty decent, and it's back to getting that way again. And it's hard when you're so able-bodied, and then one day it's all taken away from you. Like, let me give you an example. When I had first injured myself, I live at home alone in a big old house.
Like a mansion, man.
Like a mansion.
It is, the
wrestling mansion, or the wrestler's bread and breakfast, as I call it. Right? But anyway, I live in this big old house with an 1.5 acre property, which was fine for somebody who's able-bodied and strong. But all of a sudden, when I become this emaciated, atrophied weakling that looks like Twiggy, the supermodel from the 60s,
yes.
That's what I turned out looking like. Like I remember once when I had first injured myself and I wasted away to nothing, I went to this Chinese restaurant that I frequent, and the woman looked at me and said, "Oh my God, are you dying from cancer?" And I was like, "Oh man, I look that bad, eh?" Anyways, so, and I remember one time when I was first injured, no one was around, my parents weren't available. I had to go to Canadian Tire to get something, and I was off of work. So I drove over to the Canadian Tire. This is my first time being in a big box store in a long time. And when I was able-bodied, I could whip through Lowe's, I could whip through Home Depot in no time. I'd just be zipping through here and there and out in 15 minutes. This time when I go through the doors, it feels like it's 4 times the size. Because it takes me 4 times as long to get anywhere. Hobbling around on crutches or canes or using the wheelie cart that they have for you there. It's just sucks. And I am by no means trying to make the lives of people who are crippled or handicapped or have physical disabilities, whatever term you choose to use, that's yours for you to decide, not me. But it was a real challenge. I respect you and I understand and how strong and resilient you are to live your lives in such a manner. But when you go from being so able-bodied into being able to do absolutely nothing, it was horrifying.
Yeah, like when you're born with it, that's all you know.
That's all you know.
I see what you're saying.
Yeah, and it feels like my life was just stripped away from me. And yet PWA gave me a place. Even when I was emaciated and crippled, they still used my cane.
And on social media, everyone would, just give you a like or something, like, give you a nice message or something.
Yeah, absolutely. But I remember being a participant in some way. They had a place for me to help out, and I was forever grateful for that.
Was it hard though, because you wanted to be in the ring? Like for me, I hate going to wrestling when I can't wrestle, because I'm like, I should be in there, and it just makes me...
Actually, I like watching too. There are times when I said, and he said, "Oh, do you want to be with me as a manager?" I said, "No, let me go out into the crowd and just work them up into a frenzy."
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, and when I walked out of the dressing room before the show started, and they had a special seat for me to rile the audience up with, I got booed and hissed at as soon as I passed through the curtain before the show even started, even with my cane,
Yes.
right? No sympathy. And so I knew I was fine. And over time, and today I'm pretty much back now to where I was. But this is good. I'm glad I'm doing this interview because I told you I had something to share with you.
Yeah.
So this is what I'm going to share. I plan to do, let's start off with this. I'm going to be doing a lot more wrestling, not less.